Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. This is a journey that will change everything you think you know about family, love, and betrayal. Enjoy the story. My name is Harlow Michaels, and at 80 years old, I thought I knew everything about my life. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m., I remember, because I was making my usual cup of black coffee, same routine I'd followed for decades. The voice on the other end was clinical, professional. "Mr. Michaels? This is Dr. Patterson from St. Mary's Hospital. Your son Tommy has been in an accident." My heart stopped. Tommy, my youngest at 45, had always been reckless. But hearing those words, I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I arrived, they told me Tommy needed emergency surgery and a blood transfusion. "We'll need to run some tests," the doctor said. "Standard procedure." I nodded, signed the papers, did whatever they needed. All I cared about was saving my boy. 3 hours later, Dr. Patterson called me into his office. His face was pale, confused. "Mr. Michaels, I need to discuss something unusual with you. The blood work shows, well, it's impossible for you to be Tommy's biological father." The words hit me like a freight train. "What do you mean impossible? Your blood types, the genetic markers, there's no way you could have produced this child. I've run the tests 3 times to be sure." I sat there, staring at this man in his white coat, feeling like the ground had opened up beneath me. 50 years. 50 years I'd been Tommy's father. Changed his diapers, taught him to ride a bike, walked him to school, paid for his college. But the doctor wasn't finished. "Mr. Michaels, given this discovery, we felt obligated to check our records. Your other children, Marcus and Diane, they've both had blood work done here over the years. The results are the same. None of them share your DNA." The room started spinning. My 3 children, my pride and joy, my entire world, weren't mine. Not biologically, anyway. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with questions. How could this be? Eleanor, my wife of 52 years, had some explaining to do. I found her in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. At 78, she was still beautiful to me, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. But looking at her now, I felt like I was seeing a stranger. "Eleanor," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to talk." She turned, saw my face, and the color drained from her cheeks. "Harlow, what's wrong? How's Tommy?" "Tommy's fine. But I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me the truth." I pulled out the hospital paperwork, my hands trembling. "None of them are mine, are they? Not Tommy, not Marcus, not Diane. None of my children are actually mine." The wooden spoon she was holding clattered to the floor. Eleanor's face went white as fresh snow. She gripped the counter behind her, her knuckles turning pale. For a moment, I thought she might faint right there in our kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where our children had done homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. I don't understand what you're asking me, Harlow," she stammered, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Don't lie to me, Eleanor. Not now. Not after 52 years. I sat down heavily at our kitchen table, suddenly feeling every one of my 80 years. The hospital ran tests. None of our children share my blood type, my DNA. It's medically impossible for me to be their father." She stood there, frozen, and I could see her mind racing. Then, slowly, she sank into the chair across from me, the same chair she'd sat in for decades. "Tell me about before," I said quietly. "Tell me about before you met me in that hospital in Da Nang." Her hands started shaking. "Harlow, please. No, Eleanor. I need to know. I'm 80 years old. I don't have time for more lies." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, tears were streaming down her cheeks. "There was someone, before you. My heart clenched, but I stayed silent, waiting. His name was Vincent. Vincent Ashworth. I was living with him before I became a nurse, before I went to Vietnam. Her voice was barely a whisper. We were together for 2 years. I thought I loved him. What happened to him? He died in the war. That's what I was told. That's why I went to Vietnam as a nurse. I wanted to help other boys like him, boys who might not make it home. I remembered the day we met. I was 22, wounded by shrapnel, lying in that field hospital feeling sorry for myself. Eleanor walked into my life like an angel of mercy, her gentle hands treating my wounds, her soft voice reading to me when I couldn't sleep. You were pregnant when you met me, I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, sobbing now. I didn't know what to do. Vincent was dead, I was alone, pregnant, and scared. When you started courting me, when you said you loved me and wanted to marry me, I thought it was a miracle. A second chance. So you let me believe Marcus was mine. I convinced myself he could be yours. The timing, it was close enough. And you were so happy, Harlow. You were so proud to be a father. I couldn't take that away from you. I sat there, trying to process 50 years of deception. And Diane? Tommy? After Marcus was born, I got pregnant again quickly. And then again. I thought if we had more children together, children that were truly ours. But they weren't ours either, were they? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, she whispered, No. Vincent didn't die in the war, did he? Her sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. Eleanor, look at me. My voice was steady, but inside I was crumbling. Vincent didn't die in the war. I thought he did. I swear to you, Harlow, I thought he was dead when I married you. But I could see the truth in her eyes. There was more to this story, much more. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting. I need some air. When I come back, you're going to tell me everything. And I mean everything, Eleanor. No more lies. No more half-truths. I deserve that much after 50 years of living in a fantasy. As I walked toward the door, she called out, Harlow, please. I do love you. I have always loved you. I paused at the doorway but didn't turn around. I loved you too, Eleanor. But I don't even know who you really are. The evening air was cool against my face as I walked around our neighborhood, past houses where we'd watched neighbors raise their families, where we'd been part of a community for decades. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. When I returned to the house an hour later, Eleanor was sitting exactly where I'd left her, staring at her hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way I'd never seen before. But I couldn't let pity cloud my judgment. Not now. Start talking, I said, settling back into my chair. She took a shaky breath. Vincent didn't die in the war. I found out he was alive 3 months after we were married. The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 months? I got a letter. From his mother. She said he'd been wounded, was recovering in a hospital in California. She thought I should know. Eleanor's voice was barely audible. I never wrote back. You never told me. How could I? We were newlyweds, I was showing with Marcus. What was I supposed to do, Harlow? Destroy our marriage for a man I thought was dead? I leaned back in my chair, trying to process this. So you've known for over 50 years that Vincent was alive, and you never said a word. I made a choice. I chose you. I chose our life together. Our life was built on a lie, Eleanor. She flinched at my raised voice, but I was past caring about her feelings. 50 years of my life, wasted on a woman who had deceived me from day one. The phone rang, cutting through the tension. It was Marcus, our oldest. Dad? How's Tommy? Mom called earlier but she sounded strange. I looked at Eleanor, her eyes pleading with me. But I was done protecting her secrets. Tommy's fine, son. But we need to have a family meeting. Tonight. Can you call Diane and ask her to come over? There's something your mother and I need to discuss with all of you. Dad, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Just come over, Marcus. Bring Sarah and the kids if you need to. By 8 o'clock, our living room was full. Marcus sat with his wife Sarah, their teenage twins fidgeting on the couch. Diane was there with her husband Robert, and Tommy had discharged himself from the hospital against doctor's orders, his arm in a sling but otherwise okay. They all looked at us expectantly, probably thinking we were going to announce some health issue or talk about retirement homes. If only it were that simple. There's no easy way to say this, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. The blood tests at the hospital today revealed something unexpected. I explained about the genetic incompatibility, watching as confusion turned to shock on their faces. Wait, Diane said, her voice sharp. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm not your biological father. None of you are my biological children. The room erupted. Marcus shot to his feet, his face red with anger. That's impossible. Look at us, Dad. Tommy looks exactly like you. No, he doesn't, Sarah said quietly, and everyone turned to stare at her. I'm sorry, but he doesn't. None of you really look like your father. I've always thought it was odd, but… Sarah. Marcus snapped. It's true though, isn't it? Diane was looking at Eleanor with a mixture of hurt and betrayal. Mom? Tell us it's not true. Eleanor couldn't speak. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face. Tommy, still groggy from his accident and pain medication, was the first to put it together. So who is our real father? All eyes turned to Eleanor. The silence in the room was deafening. His name is Vincent Ashworth, she whispered. Is he alive? Marcus demanded. Eleanor nodded. Where is he? I don't know. But I could tell she was lying again. After 50 years of marriage, I knew all her tells. The way she touched her neck when she was nervous, how she couldn't meet anyone's eyes when she wasn't telling the truth. Marcus turned to me, his face a mask of confusion and pain. Dad, you raised us. You're still our father, right? This doesn't change anything, does it? Before I could answer, Tommy spoke up, his words slurred slightly from the medication, but we have a whole other father out there somewhere. A father who doesn't even know we exist. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Diane started crying. Mom, how could you do this to us? To Dad? I was scared, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. I was pregnant and alone and scared. But you've had 50 years to tell the truth. Marcus shouted. 50 years. I watched my family, the family I'd built, loved, and sacrificed for, tear itself apart. And in that moment, I realized this was just the beginning. If Eleanor had lied about this for 50 years, what else had she been hiding? The family meeting ended with everyone storming out. Marcus slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. Diane left without saying goodbye to either of us. Tommy, still weak from his accident, just shook his head and asked his brother to drive him home. Eleanor and I sat in the sudden silence of our empty house, the weight of 50 years of lies pressing down on us like a physical thing. I need to know everything, I told her. And I mean everything, Eleanor. No more protecting me, no more protecting yourself. Where is Vincent Ashworth? She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice so small I could barely hear it, she said, he lives in Millbrook. About an hour from here. My blood ran cold. An hour from here? For how long? I don't know exactly. Maybe 20 years. 20 years? I stood up, pacing to the window. You've known for 20 years that the father of our children lives an hour away, and you never said anything? I never contacted him, Harlow. I swear I never contacted him. But there was something in her voice, something that made me turn around and really look at her. But you've seen him, haven't you? She couldn't meet my eyes. Eleanor? Once. Just once. It was about 15 years ago. I was at the farmer's market in Millbrook with Diane, and I saw him across the crowd. Did he see you? No. I left immediately. I sank back into my chair, feeling older than my 80 years. What does he look like? Like Marcus, she whispered. And Tommy. He looks exactly like our boys. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in my entire life. I hired a private investigator. Sterling Wade had an office above a diner on Main Street. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. When I told him what I needed, he didn't even blink. This kind of thing is more common than you'd think, Mr. Michaels, he said, leaning back in his chair. Family secrets have a way of surfacing eventually. I need to know everything about Vincent Ashworth. Where he's been, what he's been doing, whether he knows about the children. And your wife? Does she know you're doing this? My wife has forfeited her right to know what I'm doing. Sterling nodded. I'll need a few days. Maybe a week. This Vincent, do you have any other information about him? Middle name, birth date, last known address before the war? I gave him what little I knew, and then I went home to wait. 3 days later, Sterling called. Can you come to my office? I have some information you're going to want to hear in person. The drive into town felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. When I walked into Sterling's office, he had a thick folder on his desk. Sit down, Mr. Michaels. His tone was gentle but serious. Vincent Ashworth is alive and well. He's 79 years old, lives alone in a small house on Elm Street in Millbrook. He never married. Never married? Never. According to neighbors I spoke with, he's always been something of a loner. Keeps to himself, works in his garden, goes to the same diner every morning for breakfast. Sterling opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. This was taken yesterday. I looked down at the picture and nearly dropped it. The man in the photo was like looking at Marcus 30 years from now, or Tommy in another 20 years. The resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable. There's more, Sterling said quietly. I spoke with some of his old neighbors from before he moved to Millbrook. Mr. Michaels, Vincent Ashworth has spent the last 50 years believing that the love of his life abandoned him for another man. He's never gotten over losing your wife. The room started spinning. What do you mean? According to what I could piece together, Vincent came home from the war in late 1971. He went looking for Eleanor, but she was already gone. Married to you. He spent months trying to find her, trying to understand why she'd left him for someone else. I stared at the photograph, at this man who'd unknowingly haunted my marriage for 5 decades. Does he know about the children? That's the thing, Mr. Michaels. He doesn't. He has no idea Eleanor was pregnant when she left him. No idea he has 3 children and 5 grandchildren. The weight of this revelation settled on my shoulders. Vincent Ashworth had spent 50 years alone, mourning a woman who'd left him, never knowing he was a father. What do you want me to do next? Sterling asked. I looked at that photograph one more time, studying the face of the man whose life had intersected with mine in ways I'd never imagined. I want to meet him. Sterling arranged the meeting for the following Saturday at a small cafe in Millbrook called Murphy's Diner. I told Eleanor I was going to visit an old army buddy, another lie to add to the mountain we'd built between us. I arrived 30 minutes early and sat in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. At exactly 2 o'clock, a man walked through the door, and I knew immediately it was him. Vincent Ashworth looked like he could be Marcus's older brother. Same strong jawline, same way of carrying his shoulders, same careful way of scanning a room before choosing where to sit. When his eyes met mine across the diner, I saw recognition flicker across his face, not of me, but of something familiar he couldn't quite place. I stood up slowly and walked over to his table. Vincent Ashworth? He nodded, wariness creeping into his expression. Do I know you? My name is Harlow Michaels. I think we need to talk about Eleanor. The color drained from his face. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. Eleanor? How do you, is she? She's fine. She's my wife. Vincent stared at me for a long moment, then slowly sat down. Your wife? Of course. His voice was bitter. You're the man she left me for. I'm the man she married after she thought you were dead. Dead? Vincent's head snapped up. Who told her I was dead? I sat down across from him, studying this man who'd been a ghost in my marriage for 50 years. That's what she told me. That you died in Vietnam. But Vincent, there's something else. Something bigger. For the next hour, I told him everything. About the hospital, about the blood tests, about discovering that none of my children were actually mine. I watched his face go through a dozen different emotions, confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally, a dawning understanding that changed everything. Children, he whispered. Eleanor had children? 3 of them. Marcus is 51, Diane is 49, and Tommy is 45. Vincent's hands started trembling. My children? Biologically, yes. But Vincent, I raised them. I changed their diapers, taught them to ride bikes, walked them down the aisle. They don't even know you exist. He was quiet for so long I thought he might be having a heart attack. Finally, he looked up at me with eyes full of tears. She was pregnant when she left me? Yes. And she never told me. She thought you were dead. Vincent shook his head slowly. I wasn't dead, Harlow. I was in a hospital in San Diego for 6 months, then I came home looking for her. I went to her old apartment, asked her neighbors, her friends. Someone finally told me she'd gotten married and moved away. My stomach dropped. Someone told you she'd gotten married? Her landlord. Said she'd left with some soldier, seemed real happy about it. I figured she'd found someone better. I leaned back in my chair, a horrible realization washing over me. Vincent, when exactly did you come home from the war? December of 1971. Why? Eleanor and I had married in October of 1971. If Vincent came home in December. She knew, I said, more to myself than to him. She knew you were alive when she married me. Vincent studied my face. What are you saying? I'm saying my wife has been lying to both of us for 50 years. We sat in silence for several minutes, 2 old men trying to process a betrayal that spanned decades. Do you have pictures? Vincent asked quietly. Of the children? I pulled out my wallet and showed him photos of Marcus, Diane, and Tommy. I watched his face as he studied each one, seeing himself in their features, recognizing the family resemblance that I'd been blind to for half a century. They're beautiful, he whispered. Are they good people? The best, I said, and meant it. Marcus is a high school principal. Diane's a nurse, like Eleanor was. Tommy's a carpenter. They're all married, all have children of their own. Grandchildren, Vincent said, wonder in his voice. I have grandchildren. 5 of them. Vincent set the photos down carefully, as if they were made of glass. What happens now, Harlow? Do they know about me? They know you exist. They know Eleanor lied about you being dead. But they don't know where you are or that you never knew about them. And Eleanor? What does she know about this meeting? Nothing. She thinks I'm visiting an old army buddy. Vincent nodded slowly. She always was good at keeping secrets, wasn't she? The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable, and I realized that this man had spent 50 years believing that the woman he'd loved had simply abandoned him for someone else. He'd carried that rejection, that sense of not being good enough, for 5 decades. Vincent, I said carefully, what do you want to do? Do you want to meet them? He looked at me with eyes that held 50 years of loneliness. More than anything in the world. Driving home from that diner, my mind was spinning with everything Vincent had told me. The man had spent 50 years thinking Eleanor had simply abandoned him for someone better. He'd never known about the children, never known he was a father, never known that Eleanor had told me he was dead. But there was something else eating at me, something that Vincent had said that didn't add up. He'd mentioned coming home in December of 1971, 2 months after Eleanor and I had married. If someone had told him Eleanor was married and happy, who was that someone? And why hadn't Eleanor mentioned that people knew where she'd gone? I needed answers, and I needed them now. When I walked into the house, Eleanor was in the living room, reading one of her romance novels. She looked up when I entered, her face hopeful. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "How was your visit with your army friend?" she asked. I sat down across from her, studying her face carefully. "I didn't visit an army friend, Eleanor. I visited Vincent Ashworth." The book fell from her hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Her face went completely white. "You what?" "I hired a private investigator. Found Vincent in 3 days. Had a very interesting conversation with him this afternoon." Eleanor's hand started shaking. "Harlow, please, let me explain. I'm done with your explanations. I want the truth. Vincent told me he came home from the war in December of 1971. December, Eleanor. 2 months after we were married. She couldn't meet my eyes. He went looking for you. Went to your old apartment, asked around. Your landlord told him you'd gotten married and moved away. Eleanor, you knew he was alive before you married me, didn't you?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." The word hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected it, but hearing her confirm it was devastating. "How long before our wedding did you know?" 3 days. 3 days. She'd known for 3 days that the father of her unborn child was alive, and she'd married me anyway. "He sent you a letter?" "He came to see me." This was worse than I'd imagined. "Vincent came to see you before our wedding?" "He showed up at my apartment. He was thin, looked terrible. He'd been in the hospital for months." Eleanor was crying now, but I felt no sympathy for her. "He begged me to come with him, said we could start over, raise the baby together. And you said no. Harlow, you have to understand. Vincent had nothing. No job, no money, no prospects. He was damaged from the war, drinking too much. You offered me security, stability. A future. So you chose money over love. I chose survival. I was 19 years old, pregnant, and scared. Vincent was broken, and I couldn't trust that he'd be able to take care of us. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard I'd maintained for 50 years, the life I'd built with this woman who'd been lying to me since day one. "Did you love him?" The question hung in the air for a long time before she answered. "Yes. I loved him terribly. More than you loved me? Differently than I loved you." I turned around to face her. "That's not what I asked." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Yes. I loved him more than I loved you. But love doesn't put food on the table or a roof over your head." The honesty of it was brutal. For 50 years, I'd been second choice. A safe harbor instead of true love. Vincent never knew about any of this, did he? He spent 50 years thinking you'd simply abandoned him for someone else. I couldn't tell him about the baby. If he'd known, he would have fought for you. He would have found a way. Maybe. But I'd already made my choice. I looked at this woman I'd spent my entire adult life with, this woman I'd loved and cherished and built a family with, and I realized I'd never really known her at all. "I'm going to tell the children the truth. All of it." Eleanor shot to her feet. "No, Harlow, please. They'll hate me. They have a right to know. They have a right to know their real father, and Vincent has a right to know his children. What about us? What about our marriage? I looked at her for a long moment, this stranger wearing my wife's face. Eleanor, there is no us. There never was. There was just you, settling for second best, and me, living in a fantasy. That night, I called Marcus and asked him to set up another family meeting. This time, I had a very different story to tell them. This time, they were going to learn that their real father wasn't dead after all, but had been living an hour away for 20 years, never knowing they existed. And for the first time in my life, I was going to stop protecting Eleanor from the consequences of her choices. The second family meeting was even worse than the first. When I told them that Vincent was alive and had been living in Millbrook for 20 years, Marcus punched a hole in the living room wall. Diane started hyperventilating, and Tommy just sat there staring at Eleanor like she was some kind of monster. But when I told them that Eleanor had known Vincent was alive 3 days before our wedding, that he'd actually come to see her and begged her to come with him, the room exploded. "You mean he wanted us?" Diane screamed at her mother. "Our real father actually wanted us, and you chose money instead?" Eleanor tried to explain about being young and scared, about Vincent being damaged from the war, about choosing security over uncertainty. But her words fell on deaf ears. My children had heard enough. Marcus was the angriest. He stood over Eleanor, his face red with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've stolen from us? 50 years, Mom. 50 years we could have known our real father." "Harlow is your real father," Eleanor protested. "He raised you, he loved you." "Dad will always be our father," Tommy said quietly, his voice heavy with pain. "But we had a right to know where we came from. We had a right to know that somewhere out there was a man who might have wanted to know us." "He did want to know you," I said, and all eyes turned to me. "I showed him your pictures yesterday." The man broke down crying right there in the diner. Diane covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, what must he think of us? What must he think happened to him? He thinks your mother abandoned him for someone better. He spent 50 years believing he wasn't good enough for her to stay." The guilt on Eleanor's face was evident, but it was too little, too late. "I want to meet him," Marcus said suddenly. "I want to meet our father." "Marcus, no," Eleanor pleaded. "Please don't do this. Our family." "Our family?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "What family, Mom? The one built on lies? The one where you chose comfort over truth for 50 years? Tommy, always the peacemaker, tried to calm his brother down. "Maybe we should think about this. Maybe we should take some time." "Time?" Marcus spun around to face him. "How much more time, Tommy? The man is 79 years old. We've already lost 50 years. How much time do you think any of us has left?" He had a point. Vincent was nearly 80, I was 80, and Eleanor was 78. Time wasn't something any of us had in abundance. "What's his name?" Diane asked quietly. "Vincent Ashworth." "Vincent," she repeated, testing the word. "What does he look like?" I pulled out the photograph Sterling had taken and handed it to her. She studied it for a long moment, then passed it to her brothers. "Jesus," Tommy whispered. "It's like looking at Marcus in 30 years. Or you in 20, Marcus added, staring at the photo. They passed the picture between them, each seeing themselves in Vincent's features, recognizing the family resemblance that I'd been blind to for decades. "Does he know we want to meet him?" Diane asked. "He knows you exist now. He knows you're good people with families of your own. And yes, he wants to meet you more than anything." Eleanor stood up abruptly. "I won't be part of this. I won't watch you destroy what's left of our family for a man who..." "Who what, Mom?" Marcus interrupted. "Who loved you? Who wanted to raise his children? Who spent 50 years thinking he wasn't good enough for you?" Eleanor's face crumpled. "You don't understand. Vincent wasn't stable then. He was drinking, having nightmares, couldn't hold a job. I was trying to protect all of us. You were protecting yourself, Diane said coldly. And you sentenced an innocent man to 50 years of loneliness because of it. The conversation went on for another hour, voices raised, tears shed, and harsh truths spoken. By the end of it, Eleanor had locked herself in our bedroom, and my 3 children had made a decision. They wanted to meet Vincent Ashworth. Will you arrange it, Dad? Marcus asked as they were leaving. Will you set up a meeting? I looked at these 3 people I'd raised as my own, these children who would always be mine regardless of biology, and I nodded. I'll call him tomorrow. After they left, I went upstairs to find Eleanor sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at her hands. They hate me, she said without looking up. They're hurt. There's a difference. Is there? Harlow, I'm losing my entire family because of mistakes I made 50 years ago. I sat down beside her, feeling the weight of 5 decades together. Eleanor, you're losing your family because you kept making the same mistake for 50 years. You had countless opportunities to tell the truth, and you chose to keep lying. What happens now? Now our children get to meet their biological father. And maybe, if we're lucky, we can figure out how to move forward from here. Do you think they'll ever forgive me? I looked at this woman who'd shared my bed for 50 years, who'd raised children with me, who'd been my partner in building a life. Despite everything, despite all the lies and betrayal, I still felt something for her. I don't know, Eleanor. But I know they deserve the chance to find out who they really are, and Vincent deserves the chance to know his children. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly a lifetime can change. 3 days ago, I'd been a proud father and grandfather, secure in my family and my place in the world. Now I was an 80-year-old man preparing to introduce my children to the father they'd never known. Tomorrow, I would call Vincent and arrange a meeting that would change all our lives forever. I called Vincent the next morning and arranged for him to meet the children at my house that Saturday. The conversation was awkward. How do you tell a man that his 3 adult children want to meet him for the first time? But Vincent's voice shook with emotion when I told him, and I could hear him crying softly on the other end of the line. Thank you, Harlow, he said. I know this can't be easy for you. He was right. It wasn't easy watching another man prepare to meet the children I'd raised. But it was the right thing to do. Friday afternoon, Sterling Wade called with news I wasn't expecting. Mr. Michaels, I've been digging deeper into Eleanor's past, and I found something you need to know. Can you come to my office? When I arrived, Sterling had even more files spread across his desk. His expression was grim. I found Eleanor's medical records from 1971, he said without preamble. The prenatal care she received before Marcus was born. Okay. Harlow, according to these records, Eleanor knew exactly when Vincent would be returning from Vietnam. She had a letter from him dated September 15, 1971, 3 weeks before your wedding, telling her his exact discharge date and that he was coming home to marry her. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. 3 weeks? There's more. I found records of a phone call she made to the base hospital where Vincent was recovering. She spoke to his doctor on September 20th, 5 days after receiving the letter. She knew exactly where he was and that he was alive and well. I sat down heavily in Sterling's client chair. So when Vincent showed up at her apartment 3 days before our wedding, she was expecting him. She'd known for weeks that he was coming home. The betrayal went even deeper than I'd imagined. Eleanor hadn't just made a spur-of-the-moment decision when Vincent appeared at her door. She'd had weeks to plan, weeks to think about what she was going to do when he returned. There's something else, Sterling continued. I spoke to Vincent's old neighbors again, asked more detailed questions. Vincent didn't just come home and start looking for Eleanor randomly. He went straight to her apartment because he'd sent her that letter with his discharge date. He was expecting to find his girlfriend waiting for him. Instead, he found an empty apartment and a landlord who told him she'd married someone else. Exactly. But here's the thing, Harlow. That landlord? He was Eleanor's uncle. My blood ran cold. Her uncle? Eleanor's mother's brother. he owned the building where she'd been living. When Vincent showed up looking for her, her own uncle told him she'd gotten married and moved away. But here's what's interesting: according to property records, Eleanor had already moved out of that apartment 3 weeks earlier, right after she got Vincent's letter. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of deception that was more calculated than I'd ever imagined. She planned it, I said, more to myself than to Sterling. She got Vincent's letter saying he was coming home, and she planned the whole thing. It looks that way. She moved out of the apartment, married you quickly, and arranged for her uncle to tell Vincent she'd married someone else if he came looking. I felt sick. All these years, I'd believed Eleanor's story about being young and scared and making a desperate choice. But the truth was, she'd coldly and methodically chosen to destroy Vincent's life to secure her own future. Does Vincent know any of this? No. He still believes Eleanor simply fell in love with someone else while he was gone. He has no idea how premeditated this all was. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with this new information. When I walked into the house, Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming softly to herself as if nothing had changed. "How was your day, dear?" she asked without turning around. I set Sterling's files on the kitchen table with a loud thud. Eleanor turned around, saw the papers, and her face went pale. "What's that?" "Medical records from 1971. Phone records. Property records. Would you like to tell me about the letter you received from Vincent 3 weeks before our wedding? Or should I start with the phone call you made to his doctor?" Eleanor's hand started shaking. She gripped the counter behind her for support. "Harlow. You knew exactly when he was coming home. You planned everything, didn't you? You moved out of your apartment, married me quickly, and set up your uncle to lie to Vincent when he came looking for you." The color drained completely from her face. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter how I found out. What matters is that you've been lying to me about this too. All these years, I thought you'd made a desperate choice when Vincent showed up unexpectedly. But you knew he was coming. You had weeks to plan what you were going to do." Eleanor sank into a chair, her whole body trembling. "I was scared, Harlow. I was 19 and pregnant and terrified. So you destroyed an innocent man's life to save yourself." "I didn't mean to hurt him. I couldn't face him. I couldn't tell him I'd chosen someone else. So instead you let him believe he wasn't good enough for you. You let him spend 50 years thinking he was worthless." Eleanor started crying, but I felt no sympathy for her anymore. Every tear she'd shed, every explanation she'd given, every moment of remorse, it was all tainted by the knowledge that her betrayal had been calculated and deliberate. "Tomorrow, Vincent is coming to meet his children," I said coldly. "And I'm going to tell him the truth. All of it." Eleanor looked up at me with terror in her eyes. "Please, Harlow. Please don't. It will destroy him. Eleanor, you destroyed him 50 years ago. Tomorrow, I'm going to try to help him heal." Saturday morning arrived with a cold October rain that seemed to match the mood in our house. Eleanor had barely spoken to me since I'd confronted her with the evidence of her premeditated betrayal. She'd spent most of the night crying, and when morning came, she looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Vincent was due to arrive at 2 o'clock, along with Marcus, Diane, and Tommy. I'd decided not to tell the children about Eleanor's calculated deception, not yet. They had enough to process just meeting their biological father for the first time. At 1:30, Eleanor came downstairs dressed in her best dress, her hair carefully arranged, makeup covering the damage from a night of tears. "You don't have to be here for this," I told her. "Yes, I do," she said quietly. "They're still my children, and I need to face this." The first to arrive was Vincent. When I opened the door, I was struck again by how much he looked like Marcus and Tommy. He was nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he stepped into the house where his children had grown up. "Harlow," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for this." Before I could respond, Eleanor appeared in the doorway to the living room. Vincent saw her and stopped dead in his tracks. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the distance of 50 years. I could see the young man Vincent had been in his eyes, could see the love and pain and confusion he'd carried all these decades. "Hello, Vincent," Eleanor said softly. "Eleanor." His voice was barely a whisper. You look exactly the same." It was a lie, of course. We were all old now, all marked by the years. But I understood what he meant. When you love someone that deeply, you always see them as they were when you first fell in love. The children arrived minutes later, and the atmosphere in the room became electric with tension and anticipation. I made introductions, watching as Vincent met each of his children for the first time. Marcus was formal, shaking Vincent's hand and studying his face intently. Diane was emotional, tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at this man who was so clearly her father. Tommy, still recovering from his accident, was the most direct. "You really had no idea about us?" he asked. Vincent shook his head. "None. If I had known Eleanor was pregnant when she left." "What would you have done?" Marcus asked. "I would have moved heaven and earth to find her. To find all of you." The conversation was stilted at first, everyone trying to navigate this impossible situation. But gradually, as the afternoon wore on, something beautiful began to happen. Vincent told stories about his childhood, about his time in Vietnam, about the life he'd built in his solitude. The children shared memories of growing up, photos of their own children, pieces of their lives that Vincent had missed. I watched Eleanor during all of this, saw the pain and guilt etched on her face as she witnessed what she'd stolen from all of them. But I also saw something else, a calculation in her eyes, as if she was trying to figure out how to minimize the damage to herself. Around 4 o'clock, Diane asked the question I'd been dreading. "Vincent, when you came home from the war, what exactly happened? How did you find out Mom had married someone else?" Vincent's face darkened with old pain. "I went to her apartment. Her landlord told me she'd gotten married and moved away. Said she seemed very happy about it." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "But you tried to find her, right?" Tommy asked. 4 months. I hired a private investigator, checked marriage records, asked everyone who might know where she'd gone. But it was like she'd vanished." Marcus looked at Eleanor. "Mom, why didn't you tell him where you were? Why didn't you at least let him know about us?" Eleanor opened her mouth to give what I was sure would be another carefully crafted lie, but I couldn't let her do it anymore. These people, Vincent and my children, deserved the truth. "Because she knew exactly when you were coming home," I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. Eleanor's face went white. "What do you mean?" Vincent asked. I looked at Eleanor, giving her one last chance to tell the truth herself. When she remained silent, I continued. "Eleanor received a letter from you 3 weeks before our wedding, Vincent. You told her exactly when you'd be discharged and that you were coming home to marry her. She also called your doctor at the hospital to confirm you were alive and well." The room fell completely silent. Vincent stared at Eleanor with growing comprehension. "You knew I was coming home?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes. You knew, and you married him anyway?" "Vincent, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Marcus stood up, his face red with anger. "Explain how you got a letter from our father saying he was coming home to marry you, and you decided to marry someone else instead? It wasn't that simple." "Then make it simple, Mom," Diane said coldly. "Tell us exactly what happened." Eleanor looked around the room at all of us, her children, her husband, and the man whose life she destroyed. Finally, she broke. "I was scared. I got Vincent's letter, and I panicked. He was coming home expecting to find his girlfriend waiting for him, expecting to get married and start a family. But I'd been thinking during those months he was gone, thinking about what kind of life we'd have." "What kind of life?" Vincent asked, his voice hollow. "You didn't have anything, Vincent. No job, no money, no prospects. The war had changed you. Your letters, they were different. Darker. I knew you were drinking, having nightmares. I couldn't trust that you'd be able to take care of me and a baby. So you found someone who could, Vincent said. Eleanor looked at me with guilt and shame. Harlow was stable. He had a good job, a future. He could give me security. And you just decided to throw me away? Vincent's voice cracked. I didn't know how to face you. I didn't know how to tell you I'd chosen someone else. So I arranged things so you'd think I'd already moved on. The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Vincent looked like he'd been punched in the gut, and my children stared at their mother with expressions of disgust and betrayal. You let me believe for 50 years that I wasn't good enough for you, Vincent whispered. That you'd found someone better. Vincent, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry would never be enough for what she'd done to all of us. The silence in that room was deafening. Vincent sat there, staring at Eleanor with 50 years of pain and confusion finally making sense. My children looked at their mother like they were seeing her for the first time, and honestly, maybe they were. Maybe we all were. Vincent was the first to speak, his voice steady but hollow. Eleanor, do you have any idea what you did to me? She couldn't meet his eyes. I spent 50 years believing I wasn't good enough. 50 years thinking that the woman I loved had found someone better, someone more worthy. I never married, never had a family, never even tried to find love again because I was convinced I was fundamentally flawed. Vincent. No. His voice was firm now. You don't get to explain anymore. You had 50 years to tell the truth, and you chose to let me live with that lie every single day. He turned to look at Marcus, Diane, and Tommy. And you three. You had a father who wanted you, who would have loved you, who would have given anything to watch you grow up. She stole that from all of us. Marcus was pacing now, his anger barely contained. Mom, how could you do this? How could you be so selfish? I was 19. Eleanor cried. I was scared and pregnant and alone. You weren't alone, Vincent said quietly. You had me. I was coming home to marry you, to build a life with you. You were never alone. Tommy, who'd been silent through most of this, finally spoke up. What I don't understand is how you could watch Dad raise us for 50 years, knowing our real father was out there somewhere, thinking he'd been abandoned. Eleanor started crying again, but there was something different about these tears. They seemed more for herself than for the pain she'd caused others. I thought about telling you, she said. So many times over the years, I thought about it. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. How do you tell your children that their father isn't really their father? How do you tell your husband that your entire marriage was built on a lie? You tell the truth, Diane said coldly. That's what decent people do. Vincent stood up slowly, his age showing in the careful way he moved. I need some air, he said. This is a lot to process. He walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to Eleanor. I have one question for you. Just one. She looked up at him, hope flickering in her eyes. Did you ever love me? Really love me? Or was I just a placeholder until something better came along? The question hung in the air. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for her answer. I loved you, Eleanor whispered. I loved you so much it terrified me. But not enough to choose me. I was scared, Vincent. I was 19 and scared. You were 19 and selfish, Marcus said harshly. There's a difference. Vincent nodded slowly. Yes. There is. He left then, walking out into the October rain without another word. Through the window, I watched him sit in his car for several minutes, his head in his hands. I'm going after him, Marcus said. No, I said, surprising myself. Let me. I grabbed my coat and went outside, tapping on Vincent's car window. He rolled it down, his eyes red with tears. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sorry for all of it. He looked at me with confusion. Why are you apologizing? You didn't know. I should have known. 50 years, Vincent. I should have seen the signs, should have questioned things. Vincent shook his head. No, Harlow. You were a victim in this too. Eleanor lied to both of us. We sat there in the rain for a few minutes, two old men trying to make sense of a lifetime of deception. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know. I want to know my children, my grandchildren. I want to be part of their lives. But Eleanor made her choices. Now it's time for the rest of us to make ours. Vincent looked back at the house where his children were waiting. Do you think they'll want to see me again? After all this? Vincent, those children have been looking for pieces of themselves their whole lives without even knowing it. Marcus has your stubborn streak, Diane has your gentle heart, and Tommy has your hands. He's a carpenter, builds beautiful things just like you probably did when you were younger. Vincent's eyes filled with tears again. I did. I was always good with my hands. They need you, Vincent. Not to replace me, I'll always be their father. But they need to know where they came from, who they really are. And you? How do you feel about all this? I thought about that question for a long moment. Hurt. Angry. Betrayed. But also, relieved, in a strange way. For 50 years, I felt like something was missing in my marriage, something I could never quite put my finger on. Now I know what it was. Eleanor's heart was never fully mine. Vincent nodded. She was always comparing everything to what we'd had. Yes. And you deserve to know your children, Vincent. They deserve to know you. He started his car engine. I need some time to think about all this. Take all the time you need. But don't take too long. We're not getting any younger, and there's already been too much time wasted. As I watched him drive away, I realized that for the first time in days, I felt something like hope. Not for my marriage, that was probably beyond saving. But for my children, for Vincent, for the possibility that something good might come out of all this pain. When I went back inside, Eleanor was gone. The children told me she'd locked herself in our bedroom again. Dad, Diane said, what happens now? I looked at these three wonderful people I'd had the privilege of raising, and I smiled. Now we figure out how to be a family. A bigger, more complicated family than we were a week ago. And Mom? Your mother will have to live with the consequences of her choices. We all will. Over the next 2 weeks, something unexpected began to happen. Vincent started coming around regularly, and my children began building relationships with him that were both tentative and profound. It was strange, watching this man who looked so much like my son sit at my kitchen table, telling stories about his childhood and asking endless questions about theirs. Marcus was the first to truly warm up to Vincent. They discovered they both had the same analytical mind, the same way of approaching problems methodically. Vincent had been a mechanic before the war, and Marcus had always been good with his hands despite becoming a principal. They spent hours in my garage, working on Marcus's old truck and talking about everything except the obvious. Diane was more cautious, but I could see her studying Vincent, looking for pieces of herself in him. When she mentioned that she'd always felt drawn to helping people, Vincent quietly shared that he'd spent 30 years volunteering at the VA hospital, helping other veterans adjust to civilian life. The connection was immediate and deep. Tommy, still recovering from his accident, was the most direct. Do you regret not fighting harder for Mom? He asked Vincent one afternoon. Vincent considered the question carefully. I regret not knowing about you three. But fighting for your mother? No. A man shouldn't have to fight for someone who doesn't want to be fought for. Eleanor had barely left our bedroom in those 2 weeks. She came down for meals, moving through the house like a ghost, but she couldn't face Vincent or really engage with the children when he was around. The weight of her guilt was crushing her, but I found it hard to feel sympathy for her anymore. What surprised me most was how I felt about Vincent. I'd expected to resent him, to feel threatened by his presence in my family. Instead, I found myself liking the man. He was thoughtful, gentle with the children, and never once tried to undermine my position as their father. If anything, he seemed grateful that they'd been raised with love and stability. "You did a good job with them," he told me one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching Tommy teach Vincent's grandson how to throw a baseball. "They're good kids," I replied. "They always were." "Marcus told me about the time you worked 3 jobs to pay for Diane's nursing school." I shrugged. "That's what fathers do." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "I would have done the same thing, you know. If I'd had the chance." "I know you would have." The grandchildren were the easiest part of all this. Kids adapt quickly, and to them, Vincent was just another grandfather who'd appeared in their lives. They called him Grandpa Vince and seemed to accept his presence without question. One afternoon, while Vincent was helping Tommy's oldest son with a woodworking project, Marcus pulled me aside. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Are you okay with all this? With Vincent being around so much?" I thought about the question. Was I okay with it? A month ago, the answer would have been an emphatic no. But watching Vincent with my family, seeing how much joy his presence brought to my children and grandchildren, I found my feelings were more complicated than I'd expected. "Marcus, your mother stole 50 years from that man. 50 years of knowing his children, of being part of their lives, of watching them grow up. If having him around now gives him some of that back, then yes, I'm okay with it. But what about you? Where does that leave you?" "It leaves me exactly where I've always been. As your father. Vincent may be your biological parent, but I'm the one who raised you. I'm the one who was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every milestone. That doesn't change." Marcus hugged me then, something he hadn't done since he was a child. "I love you, Dad. That'll never change." "I love you too, son." Later that week, Diane approached me with a different concern. "Dad, what are we going to do about Mom?" Eleanor's isolation was becoming more pronounced. She'd stopped cooking, stopped participating in family activities, stopped being present even when she was in the same room. "I don't know, sweetheart. Your mother needs to figure out how to live with what she's done. But she's destroying herself. And honestly, Dad, she's making this harder for all of us. Every time Vincent comes over, the tension in the house is unbearable." Diane was right. Eleanor's guilt and shame were poisoning the atmosphere, making it difficult for anyone to move forward. That evening, I went upstairs to talk to Eleanor. I found her sitting by the bedroom window, staring out at nothing. "We need to talk," I said. She didn't turn around. "What's left to talk about?" "Your children. Your grandchildren. The fact that you're making an already difficult situation impossible. They hate me. They're disappointed in you. There's a difference." Eleanor finally turned to look at me. "Do you hate me, Harlow?" I considered the question carefully. Did I hate her? I was angry, hurt, betrayed. But hate? No, Eleanor. I don't hate you. But I don't know if I can forgive you either. What do you want me to do? I want you to stop hiding. I want you to come downstairs and be part of this family while we figure out how to move forward. Vincent isn't going anywhere, and neither are our children. You can either be part of finding a solution, or you can continue to be part of the problem. I don't know how to face him. The same way you should have faced him 50 years ago. With honesty and courage. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and broken. I was such a coward. Yes, you were. But that was 50 years ago. The question is, what are you going to be now? 3 weeks into this new reality, Sterling Wade called with news I wasn't expecting. His voice was more serious than usual when he asked me to come to his office immediately. Harlow, I found something else. Something big. When I arrived, Sterling had a thick manila folder sitting on his desk, and his expression was grim. I've been digging deeper into Eleanor's past, trying to piece together the complete timeline, he began. I found medical records from a clinic in Dover, about 2 hours from where Eleanor was living in 1971. What kind of medical records? Sterling opened the folder and pulled out photocopied documents. Birth records, Harlow. Eleanor gave birth to another child in 1970, before she met you. A boy. The words hit me like a physical blow. Another child? Vincent's son. Born 14 months before Marcus. Eleanor gave him up for adoption immediately after birth. I stared at the documents, my mind struggling to process this information. She had another baby? The adoption records show the child was placed with a family named Wells in Springfield. They named him Cameron Wells. He's 55 years old now, Harlow. He's a doctor, works at Springfield General Hospital. Another child. Another son that Vincent never knew existed, that my children never knew they had a brother. Does the adoption agency have current contact information? They do. But there's more you need to know before you decide what to do with this information. Sterling pulled out another document. Cameron Wells tried to find his birth parents when he turned 18. The adoption agency contacted Eleanor in 1989. She knew? She's known for 36 years that this child was looking for her? She refused all contact. Told the agency she didn't want to be found, didn't want any relationship with the child she'd given up. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by this new layer of betrayal. Not only had Eleanor hidden Vincent's existence from our children, but she'd also hidden the existence of their older brother. And when that brother had tried to find her, she'd rejected him completely. There's one more thing, Sterling said quietly. Cameron Wells was raised in foster care. The Wells family gave him back to the state when he was 8 years old. He bounced around the system until he aged out at 18. The implications of this hit me like a sledgehammer. While Eleanor was building a comfortable life with me, raising Vincent's other 3 children in security and love, their oldest brother was struggling through foster care, unwanted and alone. I need copies of everything, I said. Harlow, what are you going to do with this information? I looked at the birth certificate showing Cameron Wells's birth date, his original name before adoption, Vincent Cameron Ashworth, and felt a rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I'm going to tell my family the truth. All of it. That evening, I called another family meeting. This time, I asked Vincent to come too. When everyone was gathered in the living room, I set Sterling's folder on the coffee table. Eleanor took one look at the folder and went completely white. There's something else you all need to know, I began. About another family member none of you knew existed. I told them about Cameron, about Eleanor giving birth to Vincent's first son and placing him for adoption, about the boy growing up in foster care while his 3 younger siblings lived in comfort. Vincent's reaction was immediate and devastating. He stood up abruptly, his face contorting with anguish. Another son? I have another son? Vincent, I didn't know what else to do, Eleanor pleaded. I was 17, alone, terrified. You were 17 when you had Cameron, Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. But you were 19 when you chose to marry Dad instead of telling Vincent about us. You had 2 years to figure out a different solution. And when Cameron tried to find you in 1989, Tommy added, you rejected him. You chose to protect your secret instead of helping your own child. Diane was crying now, not the soft tears of sadness but the angry tears of betrayal. Mom, do you understand what you've done? We have a brother who grew up in foster care while we grew up with everything we needed. A brother who probably thinks his birth mother didn't want him. Vincent was pacing now, his hands shaking. Where is he? Where is my son? He's a doctor in Springfield, I said. He's 55 years old, married, has 2 children of his own. I need to see him. I need to find him and... Vincent, I said gently. He doesn't know you exist. As far as he knows, his birth parents didn't want him and gave him away. The pain on Vincent's face was unbearable to watch. 4 children, he whispered. I had 4 children, and she took all of them from me. Eleanor was sobbing now, but her tears fell on deaf ears. Even I, who had lived with this woman for 52 years, felt nothing but disgust for her in that moment. "I want to contact him," Marcus said. "I want to find our brother." "What if he doesn't want to be found?" Diane asked. "What if he's built a life and doesn't want to deal with all this?" "Then that's his choice to make," Tommy said. "But he deserves to know that he has siblings who care about him, and a father who never knew he existed." Vincent sat down heavily, his head in his hands. 55 years old. My oldest son is 55 years old, and I've never even seen his face. "We'll find him," I said. "We'll find him, and we'll tell him the truth. He deserves to know that he wasn't unwanted, he was unknown." Eleanor finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "What if he hates us? What if he hates all of us for what I did?" "Then he has every right to," Marcus said coldly. "You stole his family from him, Mom. You stole his father, his siblings, his entire identity. If he hates us, that's on you." I looked around the room at my family, my children, Vincent, and Eleanor, and realized we were about to embark on yet another painful journey. But this time, it wasn't about uncovering lies. It was about trying to heal the damage those lies had caused. "Sterling can help us find Cameron," I said. "But we need to be prepared for any reaction. He might not want anything to do with us." "I don't care," Vincent said, looking up with determination in his eyes. "I lost 55 years with my oldest son. I won't lose another day." Sterling tracked down Cameron Wells within 2 days. He was indeed a doctor at Springfield General Hospital, a respected cardiologist with a wife named Patricia and 2 teenage daughters. When Sterling showed me his photograph, I saw immediately that Cameron looked exactly like Vincent had in the old pictures Eleanor kept hidden in her jewelry box. The question was how to approach him. You can't just call someone and say, "Hello, you have a father and 3 siblings you never knew about." We decided I should go alone first, to gauge his reaction and see if he was even open to learning about his biological family. Springfield General Hospital was a 2-hour drive from our house. I made the trip on a Thursday morning, my stomach churning with nervousness the entire way. At the information desk, I asked to speak with Dr. Cameron Wells, saying I had personal information about his birth family. The receptionist made a phone call, and 20 minutes later, a tall man in a white coat approached the waiting area. The resemblance to Vincent was so striking that I had to catch my breath. "Mr. Michaels? I'm Dr. Wells. I understand you have information about my birth family?" His voice was cautious but professional. This was clearly a man accustomed to handling difficult situations. "Yes. Is there somewhere private we could talk?" He led me to a small office off the main corridor. When we were seated, he leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him. "Before we begin, Mr. Michaels, I should tell you that I stopped looking for my birth parents years ago. I made peace with the fact that they didn't want to be found. Dr. Wells, Cameron, your birth parents didn't abandon you because they didn't want you. Your father never knew you existed." Cameron's composure faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" For the next hour, I told him everything. About Vincent returning from Vietnam to find Eleanor gone, about her marrying me while pregnant with his children, about the 50 years Vincent had spent believing he'd been abandoned. I watched Cameron's face go through a range of emotions, disbelief, anger, sadness, and something that might have been hope. "My father is alive?" he asked when I finished. "Very much alive. He's 79 years old, lives in Millbrook, and has spent the last month getting to know your 3 younger siblings." "I have siblings?" "Marcus is 51, Diane is 49, and Tommy is 45. You also have 5 nephews and nieces who don't know they have an uncle." Cameron was quiet for a long time, processing this information. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "The woman who gave birth to me, Eleanor, she refused contact when I tried to find her in 1989. She was protecting a secret that she'd kept for 20 years at that point. She was afraid that any contact with you would expose her lies about your father being dead. So she chose to let me believe I was unwanted rather than admit she'd lied to her husband." "Yes." Cameron stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the hospital parking lot. I grew up in 7 different foster homes, Mr. Michaels. 7. Do you know what that does to a child? Always wondering what was wrong with you that your own parents didn't want you? The pain in his voice was raw, and I felt Eleanor's betrayal afresh through his eyes. Cameron, your father wants to meet you. More than anything in the world. When he found out about you last week, he broke down crying. 55 years of not knowing you existed, and now all he wants is the chance to know his oldest son. Cameron turned back to face me. What about my siblings? How do they feel about suddenly having an older brother? They're eager to meet you. They're angry at Eleanor for keeping you a secret, and they're heartbroken that you grew up alone while they had each other. And you? Why are you here, Mr. Michaels? Why are you the one telling me this? I considered how to answer that question honestly. Because I raised your siblings as my own for 50 years, and I know what good people they are. Because your father is a good man who deserves to know his son. And because what Eleanor did to all of you was wrong, and I'm trying to help fix what can be fixed. Cameron sat back down, his hands trembling slightly. This is a lot to process. I know it is. And I want you to know that there's no pressure here. If you don't want any contact with us, we'll respect that. But if you're willing, your father and siblings would very much like to meet you. The woman, Eleanor, would she be there? Only if you wanted her to be. The rest of us have made it clear that this is about family reunion, not about her asking for forgiveness. Cameron was quiet again, and I could see him weighing 55 years of hurt against the possibility of finally having the family he'd always wondered about. I'd like to see a picture of him, he said finally. Of my father. I pulled out the photograph Sterling had taken of Vincent and handed it to Cameron. He studied it intently, and I could see him recognizing his own features in Vincent's face. We look alike, he said softly. Very much so. What's he like? Gentle. Kind. He spent 30 years volunteering at the VA hospital, helping other veterans. He never married, never had another family, because he believed the love of his life had chosen someone else over him. Cameron's eyes filled with tears. He really didn't know? He really didn't know. Cameron, your father has spent 55 years believing he wasn't good enough to be loved. Finding out about you, about all his children, has given him a reason to believe in himself again. Cameron wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. When could I meet him? Whenever you're ready. This weekend. I'd like to meet him this weekend. I felt a surge of relief and joy. I'll arrange it. Mr. Michaels? Thank you. Thank you for coming here, for telling me the truth. I've waited my whole life to understand why I was given away. Now I finally know it wasn't because I wasn't wanted. You were very much wanted, Cameron. You just weren't known. As I drove home, I thought about the phone call I was about to make to Vincent, telling him that his oldest son wanted to meet him. After 55 years of separation, this family was finally going to be complete. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at my house. Cameron would drive down from Springfield to meet Vincent and his siblings for the first time. I'd asked Eleanor if she wanted to be present, and she declined, saying she couldn't bear to face another person whose life she destroyed. Vincent arrived an hour early, more nervous than I'd ever seen him. He kept running his hands through his gray hair and asking if I thought Cameron would like him. Vincent, he's your son, I told him. He's going to love you. Marcus, Diane, and Tommy arrived with their families, creating a house full of nervous energy and anticipation. The grandchildren didn't fully understand what was happening, but they could sense the importance of the day. At exactly 2 o'clock, a silver sedan pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I watched a tall man get out of the car and stand for a moment, looking at the house where his siblings had grown up. Cameron Wells was an imposing figure, confident, successful, but I could see the vulnerability in his posture as he approached our front door. I opened the door before he could knock. Cameron. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. I led him into the living room where Vincent was waiting. When the two men saw each other, they both stopped breathing for a moment. The resemblance was even more striking in person. They could have been father and son in any family photograph. "Vincent," I said softly, "this is your son Cameron." Vincent's eyes filled with tears as he stood up slowly. "Cameron. My boy." Cameron's professional composure cracked, and suddenly he was just a 55-year-old man meeting his father for the first time. "Dad?" They embraced then, both men crying openly, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. 55 years of separation ended in that moment, and I felt something healing in my own heart as I watched it. The introductions to Marcus, Diane, and Tommy were emotional but joyful. Cameron was amazed at how much he looked like his brothers, and Diane kept touching his arm as if to make sure he was real. "I can't believe I have a big brother," she said through her tears. "I can't believe I have siblings at all," Cameron replied. As the afternoon wore on, they shared stories and photographs. Cameron told them about his difficult childhood, about aging out of foster care and putting himself through medical school. His siblings told him about growing up in our house, about family vacations and Christmas mornings and all the moments he'd missed. Vincent couldn't stop looking at Cameron, as if he was afraid his oldest son might disappear if he looked away. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you." "It wasn't your fault," Cameron assured him. "You didn't know." But then Cameron asked the question I'd been dreading. "Where is she? Where is Eleanor?" The room fell silent. I could see my children exchange glances, unsure how to answer. "She's upstairs," I said finally. "She was too ashamed to face you." Cameron's expression hardened slightly. "She should be ashamed." "Cameron," Diane said gently, "we're all angry at her. What she did was unforgivable. But maybe you could try to understand that she was young and scared." "I was young too," Cameron said, his voice sharp. "I was a child who needed his family, and she chose to protect her comfortable life instead of admitting her mistakes." The anger in his voice was justified, but it was also painful to hear. This was the one conversation I'd hoped to avoid, but it was inevitable. "Would you like to see her?" I asked. "You don't have to, but if you want to say whatever you need to say to her." Cameron considered this for a long moment. "Yes. I think I would." I went upstairs and found Eleanor sitting on our bed, staring at her hands. "Cameron wants to see you." Her face went white. I can't face him, Harlow." "Eleanor, you owe him this much. You owe him the chance to say whatever he needs to say to you." She followed me downstairs on shaking legs. When she entered the living room and saw Cameron, she stopped in the doorway as if she'd hit a wall. Cameron stood up slowly, studying the woman who'd given birth to him and then spent 55 years pretending he didn't exist. "So you're Eleanor," he said, his voice controlled but cold. "Cameron, No." He held up a hand. "You don't get to explain. You had 55 years to explain, and you chose silence. You had the chance to contact me when I was 18 and looking for you, and you chose to protect your secret instead." Eleanor started crying, but Cameron showed no sympathy. "Do you know what it's like to grow up believing your own mother didn't want you? Do you know what it's like to be passed from home to home, always wondering what was wrong with you? I was 17 and scared. And I was a child who needed his family. But you decided that your comfort was more important than my well-being." The confrontation was brutal but necessary. Cameron needed to say these things, and Eleanor needed to hear them. When he was finished, Cameron turned to Vincent. "Dad, I'd like to spend more time with you. With all of you. I want to know my family." "I'd like that more than anything," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. As the day ended and Cameron prepared to drive back to Springfield, he pulled me aside. "Mr. Michaels, thank you for everything you've done. For raising my siblings, for finding me, for bringing our family together. It was the right thing to do. Will you be okay? With all of us in Vincent's life now?" I looked at this remarkable man who'd overcome so much, and I felt proud that he was part of our family. "Cameron, you and your siblings will always be my children, regardless of biology. Having Vincent in your lives doesn't change that. It just makes our family bigger. That night, as I watched Eleanor retreat to our bedroom once again, I realized that our marriage was truly over. Not because of anger or hatred, but because we'd both finally seen the truth of what we'd built together. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out how to move forward. Tonight, I was just grateful that Vincent's family was finally complete. 3 months had passed since Cameron met his biological family. During that time, I watched my house transform into the center of an impossibly reunited family. Vincent came for dinner every Wednesday. Cameron drove down from Springfield every other weekend. My children, because they will always be my children, flourished in ways I'd never seen before. Marcus discovered he'd inherited Vincent's love for mechanics, and now they spent Saturdays working on old cars together. Diane found in Vincent the same compassion that led her to nursing, and they began volunteering together at the Veterans Hospital. Tommy and Vincent shared a deep connection through woodworking. Vincent had been a carpenter before the war, and watching Tommy work with wood filled him with paternal pride. Cameron, surprisingly, adapted fastest of all. Maybe because he'd spent his entire life knowing something was missing, and now he'd finally found the pieces that completed him. His teenage daughters loved discovering they had a grandfather who could teach them about cars and carpentry, and cousins who treated them like family from day one. Eleanor, on the other hand, had become a ghost in her own home. She rarely left the house, ate little, and when the family gathered, she retreated to our bedroom. The children tried to include her a few times, but the tension was unbearable for everyone. On a cold January evening, Eleanor finally came to talk to me. I was in the living room reading when she came downstairs, looking like she'd aged a decade in the past few months. "Harlow," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." I closed my book and looked at her. "What is it?" "I'm leaving." The words didn't shock me as much as I expected. In fact, there was a sense of inevitability about them. "Where will you go?" "My sister in Portland offered to let me stay with her. I think it would be better for everyone if I removed myself from the picture." I looked at this woman I'd shared 52 years with, who'd been my partner in raising our children, who'd been the center of my life for so long. "Eleanor, you don't have to leave." "Yes, I do. Look at them, Harlow. Look how happy they are when Vincent is here, how Cameron smiles when he talks about finally having a family. I'm the only dark thing in that joy." She wasn't wrong. Her presence had become a constant reminder of the pain she'd caused. What about us? What about our marriage? Eleanor sat down beside me on the couch where we'd spent thousands of evenings watching television, talking about our children, planning our future. "Harlow, you deserve better than a wife who spent 50 years lying to you. You deserve someone who chooses you because she loves you, not because you offer security." "Eleanor. No, let me finish. I did love you, Harlow. In my way, I really did love you. But you were right when you said my heart was never fully yours. Part of it always belonged to Vincent." We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I asked, "What will you do in Portland?" "I'm going to try to figure out who I am when I'm not living a lie. I'm going to try to find a way to live with what I've done." The next morning, I helped Eleanor pack her things. 52 years of shared life fit into a few suitcases and boxes. The children came to say goodbye, and the farewells were strained but not cruel. They still loved her, but they needed time to process everything. Vincent appeared as Eleanor was loading the last box into her car. They looked at each other across decades of pain and loss. "Eleanor," Vincent said softly. "Vincent. Take care of them. Take care of the children." "I always have," he replied, but without cruelty. She nodded, got in her car, and drove away. That evening, Vincent stayed for dinner as he always did on Wednesdays. But this time, when the children left, he stayed to talk with me. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Relieved," I said, surprising us both with my honesty. "Sad, but relieved. Harlow, I need to tell you something. These past months, getting to know my children, seeing how you raised them, you're a better man than I am." "Vincent." "No, It's true. Eleanor may have chosen me first, but she made the right decision choosing you to raise those children. They became extraordinary people because of you. I looked at this man who could have been my rival but had become something like a friend. They're extraordinary because of who they are, not because of me. We both know that's not true. In the months that followed, our strange and wonderful family found its rhythm. Vincent became a regular presence, not as a replacement for me, but as an addition. Cameron began bringing his family for monthly visits. The grandchildren now had 2 grandfathers who adored them, and they flourished with all that attention. On a spring afternoon, as I watched Vincent teach my great-grandson to fish in the pond behind the house, I realized something surprising. I was happy. Happier than I'd been in years. Marcus walked over and stood beside me. "Do you have any regrets, Dad?" I thought about the question carefully. About raising you kids? About the last 50 years? Not a single one. What about discovering the truth? The truth set us all free, Marcus. All of us. Even your mother, in her own way. He smiled. You know we love you, right? Vincent may be our biological father, but you'll always be our dad. I know. And you'll always be my children. As the sun set over our impromptu family gathering, I realized that sometimes the best families aren't formed by blood or perfect choices, but forged through forgiveness, understanding, and love that refuses to give up. Vincent found his children. My children found their roots. And me? I discovered that being a father has nothing to do with DNA and everything to do with showing up, loving unconditionally, and never giving up. At 80 years old, I learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from forgiveness, not because the person who hurt us deserves it, but because we deserve peace. And that family, truly, is defined not by the blood we share, but by the love we choose to give. The end.